They laughed as the fire consumed his father's military uniform, the only thing left after they branded him a traitor. They thought the boy hiding behind the hut would never rise, that he'd vanish with the shame and the smoke. But they didn't know that fire only forges steel. This is the story of a dark-skinned African boy from a forgotten village, who rose from ashes in exile to become the commander of the entire national army. If you believe that pain can build power, that revenge can come dressed in honor, then this tale is for you. Subscribe now to Real African Tales by H.A. for weekly stories of African pride, justice, and unstoppable spirit. Tell us in the comments which part of Africa are you watching from today. In the heart of an isolated savanna village where tall grass danced with the wind and goats grazed near cracked red earth huts, a dark-skinned child with sharp eyes and braided hair that his mother tied with cowrie-decorated strings each morning. His father, Major Obing, was the pride of the village, a tall, broad-chested soldier whose green uniform always shone with pressed perfection and brass buttons that glinted like stars. Obing was not just a soldier. He was the only link between their forgotten village and the government. Each time he returned from duty, riding in a dusty Land Rover with the national flag on its hood, children would run barefoot after the truck, singing his name. He brought medicine, books, and sometimes biscuits, but most of all, he brought honor. But everything shattered on a day the wind blew strange, a day when soldiers didn't come home to salute but to burn. A corrupt general named Brigadier Tander, whose wealth came from selling army supplies and who feared Obing's honesty, fabricated treason charges against him. They came not to arrest, but to make a lesson of him. In front of the whole village, they dragged Major Obing from his mother's cooking hut, tore the medals off his chest, and tied him to a tree. His wife, Mom Ifu, screamed as they threw the green uniform into a bonfire built from dry firewood and old army crates. The villagers watched in silence, some too scared, others ashamed, as the fire devoured the symbol of their pride. Kwabena, only 12, watched from behind a cooking shed, biting his lip till it bled, gripping the knife he had been using to peel cassava. When the fire died and the soldiers left with their boots still smoking, the boy ran to the ashes, knelt down, and picked up one half-melted brass button, now blackened by flame. That night, Mama Fua packed their belongings, tied them into a wrapper, and with her son beside her, left the village under the moon's watch. They wandered from one district to another, sometimes sleeping under trucks or inside abandoned churches, sometimes working on farms to eat. But even in the deepest hardship, Mama Fua repeated the same words. Your father didn't fall. He stood too straight for men who crawl. At 17, Kwabena joined the National Military Academy, not by connection or wealth, but by writing an essay titled, Why My Father's Uniform Still Fits Me. The commander reading it cried, from that day forward, Kwabena trained harder than anyone, running at dawn with rocks in his bag, reciting military codes under rainfall, and shining his boots with sand when polish ran out. They mocked him at first, the son of a traitor, but slowly the ranks saw what fire had made. He became a tactical genius in simulations, leading his squad to victory in war games, and earning medals in international drills. By 20, he was already a lieutenant. By 32, he was known as the Iron Brain, a strategist with the heart of a lion. He never spoke much about his past, but always carried a burnt brass button in his chest pocket like a secret prayer. Then came the border crisis, when rebel forces, backed by a foreign cartel, seized for northern provinces. The nation panicked. Several high-ranking generals fled, but Kwabena, then a colonel, volunteered to lead a counterstrike with a mix of elite troops and local fighters. It was the first time in modern history that the army worked alongside barefoot hunters and slingshot boys. For 8 months, Kwabena lived among the people, eating roasted yam by firelight, patching wounds with village herbs, studying enemy movement by listening to the rhythm of cattle bells. He liberated town after town using clever ambushes, non-lethal takeovers, and powerful speeches broadcast over seized radio stations. This is not revenge, he once said. This is the restoration of honor, my father's, mine, and ours. His face became legendary, printed on wrappers, drawn on classroom walls, and carved into tree trunks. When the final stronghold fell, he didn't raise the flag himself. He handed it to a limping village boy who had once carried messages across enemy lines. When the president called to congratulate him, Kwabena made one request: "Allow me to clear my father's name publicly." The truth came out: documents, testimonies, even an old recording of Tander admitting to the setup. The president wept on national TV. Major Obing was posthumously declared a national hero. The day they unveiled his statue standing tall. In full uniform, his arms around a young Kwabena, crowds from all over the country gathered, including old soldiers who now cried in regret. Kwabena was promoted to commander of the National Army, the youngest in the nation's history. On his first day, he entered the barracks wearing a polished green uniform stitched in the exact style his father wore, except now it bore new medals. Not for killing, but for leading, healing, and remembering. But this was only the beginning, because those who destroyed his father still controlled much of the country's wealth, and Kwabena was not done with justice. Kwabena's appointment as commander of the National Army sent shockwaves across the military and political elite, who had once laughed at his father's disgrace. Men who had made fortunes off of war contracts, ammunition rackets, and fake border operations now held emergency meetings in glass towers and hotel suites.
Ow!
Wondering whether the village-born general with the burnt brass button still in his breast pocket would forgive or strike. But Kwabena did not walk with vengeance painted on his face. He walked with focus. His first mission was not to seek revenge with guns, but to clean the very soul of the army. He went from base to base, from forest camps to desert units, from swampside marine barracks to highland airfields, inspecting, listening, and retraining. He sat with young soldiers under mango trees, wearing only his green fatigues and a simple cap, speaking to them in native dialects about duty and sacrifice. He replaced corrupt commanders with humble, battle-proven captains. He upgraded barracks, increased wages, and ensured that every widow of a fallen soldier received her due. He banned middlemen from military supply chains, exposing retired generals who had sold bullets meant for the front lines. But not everyone celebrated. Brigadier Tander, now old, retired, and hiding behind wealth and lawyers, still lived in a marble mansion overlooking the Capitol Hills. He thought himself safe, protected by decades of silent handshakes and layered secrets. But one evening, as the sun melted into gold across the savannah, he heard heavy boots on his compound tiles. Kwabena stood there, not with vengeance in his eyes, but a legal arrest warrant in his hand, flanked by military police. "You called my father a traitor," Kwabena said softly. "Now you'll explain to the nation how you betrayed it." The trial of Brigadier Tander became the most watched court proceeding in the country's history. The courtroom overflowed. With journalists, students, and veterans, old soldiers stood in the aisles in full uniform. And in the front row sat Mame Fwa, dressed in a rich kente wrapper, her gray hair wrapped in royal purple, holding the hand of her daughter-in-law. Kwabena's wife, Abba, a military nurse with kind eyes and strong arms. Evidence was overwhelming. Documents of ghost contracts, photos of hidden foreign bank accounts, and testimonies from former aides. When the guilty verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted in cheers. But Kwabena remained silent. He turned to his mother, knelt before her in full uniform, and placed the burnt brass button in her palm. "Justice is complete," he whispered. Yet he did not stop there. Under his command, the army partnered with civil society to plant peacekeeping schools in every post-conflict region. He established a military academy for orphans of war and made annual trips to the village where he was born, now transformed into a growing town with paved roads, electric lights, and a monument to Major Obing. In his speeches, Kwabena no longer spoke of enemies, but of duty, integrity, and unity. He launched the Uniform of Honor initiative, ensuring every fallen soldier's story was recorded and remembered so no child would ever have to hold ashes like he did. International forces began to visit, seeking to learn from his reforms. He was invited to speak at the African Union Security Summit, where leaders from across the continent stood and applauded as he took the stage. He began with words that would echo through history. "My father's uniform was burnt in public. But today I wear his values in front of the world." The room fell into reverent silence. Over time, Kwabena became more than a military leader. He became a national conscience, a man whose rise from the dirt reminded a continent that power built on truth lasts longer than fear. Statues were built, roads renamed, songs written. A best-selling book, From Ashes to Army Commander, was translated into 12 languages. But even in global fame, Kwabena remained grounded. Every year on the day his father died, he visited the old village, now filled with schools and clinics, and stood at the base of his father's statue. He wore no medals that day, only a simple army green shirt with the name Abing stitched on the chest. Children gathered around him, asking questions, touching his boots, calling him Uncle Commander, and in each of their curious eyes he saw a reflection of the boy he used to be, the boy who watched a fire and thought his future died with it. But fire had only tempered his soul. He had become the commander of the entire army, not through hate, but through honor. And in every salute he received, in every boot that marched beneath his command, his father's spirit marched too, proud, redeemed, and eternal.